Hey, this is Phat Critical. You can find me at phatcritical@gmail.com. Today, let's talk about the philosophy of food. So, the philosophy of food, firstly, anyone who delves into philosophy will quickly find that food is something that the vast majority of people is something not to be so picky and finicky about. And of course, throughout history, has not been something that has been a staple for an individual to choose as to what they're going to eat, unless you're in the upper classes. And even then, you still had to toe the sort of cultural line. And it wasn't, at least for the upper classes, that wasn't such a problem. However, I'm going to be talking more specifically about the philosophy of food in terms of the nature of what it is to and what it means to be eating healthy. Now, I've talked about this kind of stuff before in the past, and I just want to make a quick reminder to people that this is politics and philosophy, although philosophy, of course, talks about everything. There's nothing that philosophy does not deal with. There's nothing that is off limits in terms of what philosophers are able to talk about, because philosophy is, in and of itself, the study of reality, the study of existence, the study of being, the study of thinking, right? So that is something to recognize. Now, I am not talking about food philosophically in a political sense. I'm talking about food in just plain, um, to be more specific, I'm talking about food in the super category of that which is healthy, which is different for my point, is that it is different for each and every person. Now, statistically, you can say, well, statistically, people should eat this, that, or the other. And the problem is that statistics are not good for individual decision making, which is of course why nutritionists, dietitians, etc., exist in the first place. Now, even then, still, because people are going to go into even just shopping for a dietitian or shopping for, most people aren't going to look for a dietitian, right? Most first world citizenry types are going to have their predilections that they inherited from their individual culture, right? The media, the commercials, for example. Um, their parents, in particular, of course, have the most integral influence on them in this kind of way. Now, the problem with people philosophically looking at their food choices is that you automatically will elicit a form of, um, well, at the very least, you'll be considered radical to somebody somewhere, some kind of group somewhere, and in many groups possibly, and almost all of them possibly. So, you know, um, where philosophy comes in is that, of course, philosophy deals with reality. So that's part of the reality. That's the politics part. So, what is the mechanistically, right? What is actually healthy for an individual, and this can be different for, as I've already said, different people, which is just redundant at this point, but it bears repeating because again, people look at things, people make holistic decisions individually, and this sort of false sense of altruism, which altruism in and of itself is already an anti-philosophical concept. I mean, it's just like, get on an airplane, you put the oxygen mask on yourself first, or how else are you going to save the other person when you yourself are drowning, or you yourself are not getting any oxygen to survive? So That's the problem, right? The problem is that people aren't making individual choices in terms of what they want to eat for food, and in terms of philosophical sense, that's a problem. Um, and that's not philosophy, right? So, I mean, it doesn't have to be a problem. This is just one way of looking at it. Of course, people are very happy. A lot of people are very happy to die in their 20s, in their teens, in their 30s, 40s, etc. And if they want to die, then that's up to them. I mean, that's their free choice. Philosophy. I'm just telling you what I'm just speaking in the philosophical sense. I'm not endorsing any sort of illicit or illegal activity. I'm just saying philosophically, this is the kind of um, of course, I would not recommend anyone to do that kind of stuff. I'm just saying philosophically, empirically, statistically, um, that which people do is that which what they want, or else they would be doing something else, right? And so, just the very nature of some people's decision making, right? Some people want to eat oranges, some people don't want to eat oranges. Now, so okay, so not to make this too belaboring, what is a philosophical food list, for example, right? So, and a lot of people, again, in a philosophical sense, this almost seems completely irrelevant because food is completely irrelevant to philosophy in the macro structure of the world and the universe and the purpose of philosophy. But food is something that we do pretty much every day for most first world people. So the reason that the reason that there is no okay, so there's a lot of ifs, right? There's no way to inductively say more actually to correct myself, there's no way to deductively say you or him or them should eat this. There's no sort of prescriptive, predetermined food for people. Now, of course, this is where you can any search on Google will contradict almost everything I've said, and everybody is contradicted online, right? So why is it that how can I be a kind of authority in this sense? That's just as I'm not. I am just a critical thinker, and thinking critically about this kind of stuff is what is not being done, and that's what I'm pointing out. Critical thought, right? In other words, philosophy is critical thought is something that philosophers do. Any philosopher that's worth their salt, at least. And so, the purpose of a a selection of foods is different for each person in different circumstances. And so there's a lot of conditions, and none of them are syllogistically um, sound. None of them are, I mean, the best you can do is to reach a dialectical dead end. That's the best you can do in terms of what is determining what is the best food choice for an individual. So unpacking that, if you are to say, I want to eat bologna, right? Now, why would you want to eat bologna? That's the question, right? That's one question someone could ask. So, you know, you could say that, well, first of all, Bologna is a city in Italy. This is just something I learned yesterday, by the way, which is pretty cool. And so, you can approach things from many different angles. So, I mean, a person who's going to be eating bologna, who wants to visit Bologna, Italy, might not want to eat bologna if they're, going to be right. So, there's a lot of, this is nuts. So there's not, there's, you can't really say this is what you absolutely should eat, but you can modestly suggest that which is less efficient for an individual to eat. And one aspect of um, prognosis, if you will, would be based on what they're doing in the future, for example, would be one way to look at it. The next could be simply that, again, if it's different if it's a toddler compared to, someone who is going to be possibly dying within the next 10 hours. So I don't want to take flagpole scenarios. Let's take the sort of the typical person, the typical, sort of archetype of people who are looking for food choices. So, you know, if your goal is to lose weight, simply eating fat is the way to go, because you will just naturally eat less, quite simply. It's more, I mean, people are getting into science about it, which is completely irrelevant. Um, Empirically speaking, my meta analysis on, from what I understand, for example, in terms of what is defined as the keto type diet or keto type lifestyle, if you will, is that you're eating fat, and so and they get into sort of some people better than others getting to sort of biomedical facts or the biochemical facts about that, which I have done myself as well. And that's not the reason you lose the weight. I'll just tell you quite simply. It's because you're not crunching, right? You're not making noise crunching. And so your people aren't really going to be knowing what you're eating unless they see you visibly eating that food. And then almost everything that you can eat on a ketogenic diet, actually, I can't think of any exception except if you bake some of the foods. You can bake some of the foods. Um, and they're kind of crunchy, but most of them are just like you can eat them without any teeth, right? You can pretty much liquefy almost everything. I mean, with your gums, if you're patient enough, I suppose. So that is something to keep in mind. So that of course this is just one stepping stone in a pool of rocks. So another stepping stone. So that's the philosophy of food is actually quite complex, but it's it's subpar philosophy. It's a it's a I would say it's not exactly very relevant for most people. So why am I making this video? Well, it's relevant enough where there's some abstract principles that can be taken, such as thinking for yourself out of this message, and so that's the purpose of this stream. So yeah, I don't really have much else here. Let's see. Yeah, so if you're eating fat, right, that'd be one example. Now, another example is that when people are not focusing on what you're eating because they expect you not to eat like them already, and it just whatever, they kind of are fed up with dealing with your food choices. You start to wonder as to why you originally were eating the foods that you were already eating. And I mean, the answer is quite obvious. I mean, it takes like a split second of wonder. I mean, it's not. I'm not saying anything deep or profound here. What it's a sort of more what Daniel Dennett would define as a deepity, which is something that you say that you think is profound, which is actually quite common knowledge, and just makes you look like an idiot to everyone except yourself because you didn't realize that that's the purpose of it. Well, not purpose, but that's what and that sort of was a deepity moment there. But the the problem with the problem with it's not the it's not so then from that first wonder you get to the next wonder, and the next wonder is why are your parents eating this way, or why are these sort of superordinates in your vicinity eating this way, right? If you're the sort of right, you're the younger one, you're the one who made these choices in this food groups secondarily, or 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 not originally. So that will elicit a sort of curiosity as to why that it was the case, and that is where philosophy comes into the mix, right? So not to get too personal here, but my existence, for most of my existence, I have been overweight. And, you know, since delving into philosophy, I realize, it can be considered a kind of a privilege, but in my sense, it wasn't at all. It was a sort of form of hell and torture, and elicited a kind of cosmetic self castigation and external sort of oppressive castigation, because people look at you and they say, well, you're overweight, so you don't really care about yourself, right? And the continuation of eating that way, which continues for you to gain weight, will continue this kind of eternal castigation, right? That sort of mental flogging, which people make these assumptions and they don't say anything, and then they say, no, we don't judge anyone. Nobody judges anybody, right? But of course, people make make judgments involuntarily. Right? The subconscious is 10,000 times more powerful than the conscious mind. So if you see someone who is 30 pounds less overweight compared to when they're 30 pounds more overweight, you'll automatically assume more respect in that person who has less weight gain, assuming it's 30 pounds of fat equally. And so that, for just to keep the metaphor sort of strict there, so that would be that's what I that for personally, that was my experience with the weight gain, was that it was a sort of bullying, perpetual bullying uh, loop. And so that's and of course I'm not even delving into the sort of outside uh, mostly unexamined aspects of what it means to be overweight. Right? I'm not talking about steroid or synthol, that kind of weight gain. I'm just simply talking about people like munching down the donuts and stuff like that and gaining a bunch of weight from just an excess of insulin. And so that is something that and not to I don't want to make this into a marathon of a video. I mean, but philosophy has a lot. I mean, philosophy. You can. I mean, I could talk to death about how food is related to a larger in terms of a larger philosophical context in your day-to-day living apparatus, if you will. And so that is something I could spend a lifetime talking about, writing about, blogging about. Which reminds me, I didn't title adjustment. So that's you know I think this is something that's worthy for a continued dialogue, and that needs to be talked about. because the way that it is now politically is that it's all about this altruistic kind of, you get the vegans, right? The vegans, the vegetarians, and all these sort of quote unquote environmentalists, who are importing all the people who want to pillage the economy and destroying the environment way more um, than the prognosis of the amount of cattle it takes to make sort of different food. And then of course, what about all the corn subsidies, right? Because that um, well, those are pretty undeveloped thoughts on my end. That actually isn't completely relevant to this conversation. I'm gonna tell you contextually, it matters more what people, why the reason people are eating on an individual level than it does in a collective political way. I'm talking like hundredfold more. And so, if you come, this is hard to explain to someone. I'm picturing myself trying to explain this to someone who comes from a family who, they're just in shape, right? They're runners, they're sports, they're the athletic type, their family, they all played, basketball or hockey or something like that growing up. And so to explain it to these individuals now, I don't know. I don't know what I would say to someone in that. But coming from the experience and torment of having been obese as a child, for example, and then even as an adult, and then not being obese and being of a healthy weight, I can just tell you absolutely with the conviction of my soul, mind, heart, or what have you, that individually it matters 9.9999 billion times more what people eat than it does politically. Yes, in the larger context of society. And again, of course, I'm talking more about those who, are my next of kin before I'm going to talk about people who um, are my not next of kin. So, all right. So, I think that's a good enough for a stream here. Getting close to 25 minutes. So, thanks for tuning in. Philosophy is not a lighthearted sport. It's not a sport actually at all. Sport is something that, you know, for entertainment. Philosophy is not for entertainment, right? A lot of brilliant things came out of philosophy, and a lot of bloodshed has come from bad philosophy or no philosophy. Involuntary, right? I'm not talking people signing up for sports. People who aren't signing up for anything and just not, I guess, not philosophically aware, if you will. So, is one way of putting it. So, yeah. So, that's the best philosophy can do in this format right now. So, philosophy, right? That's the philosophy is an abstract term, and that's the best I can do right now. So, thank you for tuning in, and have yourselves a wonderful time. Thank you.